Welcome to Taking It to the Nub. This is Boston Jimmie, your host today. I have the great pleasure of sitting down for an hour or so with my guest, Michael Herklots, who is now the founder or co-founder. We'll talk to him some more about Ferio Tego Limited Cigars. A lot of story to go with that. But we'll dig into a little more with Michael as to how he got to where he is and some of the other fun things he likes to do. So let me bring Michael in. Michael, welcome.
What's happening?
How are you today?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How's Tiffany and the children?
Man, everyone is doing great. Everything is great. We're making the best of it. And it's nice to be in 2021.
It is promising.
Your lips to God's ears, my friend.
That's it, man. It's all we can hope for right now is to get through this year and get on with life as we know it. Smoke some good cigars. Speaking of, what are you smoking tonight?
I'm actually smoking a sample from my good friend Hostos Fernandez, who just opened up his own cigar factory, La Isla, Tabacalera La Isla.
Ooh.
And I worked with Hostos for years when he was with the Quesada family. I mean, he is part of the Quesada family. So now he's opened up his own factory, and he was kind enough to send me some samples. And so I started a couple last week. I brought out a 2020 TAA, which I plan on lighting up shortly, timeless TAA. But I did want to kick this off. Oh, very good.
2019.
Yes, sir. Is that the TAA or that's the regular limited?
That's the regular one.
Yeah, in the 5-pack. Beautiful.
Show you had your fingers on this somehow.
All over it.
So before we get into your new venture, let's take a fast little road back in time. 20 years plus in the cigar business. But long before that, you were like playing drums at the age of 10, I believe. Your father was a doctor and you played it, you entertained patients, I heard.
Man, I have a twin sister, Sarah, and my father is a pediatrician, recently retired, but pediatrician, and had a family practice in our home. And so my sister and I, at a very early age, used to go and just entertain in the waiting room. And we put on shows and do, magic shows and all kinds of stuff. I don't think we ever like set up drums in there because by then my dad had moved to the hospital. But we did all kinds of entertaining for patients and for families, and it was great. It was a great way to grow up. I was sick all the time, but it was still great.
And you started playing. When did you actually start playing the drums?
10. So in 5th grade, we got the option to start an instrument. My father is a great musician, a drummer, guitar player, singer, piano, composer. So I was always around music anyway. But my dad being a drummer, my uncle was a drummer. Their father, my grandfather, was a drummer. So to me, it just made sense to play drums. And so I jumped right in, more traditional start, of course, with regular snare drum and concert band in school. But then I quickly got interested in drum set and then started in the school jazz band. And that really was it. I sang a lot too. So I was always in chorus and instrumental with drums. And singing actually came more natural to me. Drums was really something that I worked really hard at. And so that was it. I took it really seriously once I got to high school, started studying privately at UConn. And then, went to pursue it as a profession in college.
Yeah, you must have been pretty good because you went to Berkeley, right? The Berkeley School of Music.
Berklee College of Music. Yeah, it was such an incredible experience. I still say, looking back, I've never worked harder in my life than I did those 4 years at Berkeley. I mean, they were just incredible years, late nights, early mornings, practicing, gigging, and then also working my day job. And it was just 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, but it was a blast.
So we're already getting comments. So usually
Okay.
it takes about 20 minutes, but Steve from Frontline Cigars up in Chicago, he asks, what is your favorite drummer? His is Steve from Def Leppard.
That's a very difficult question for me to answer, because it's like asking what my favorite cigar is. You know, the talent pool of drummers is so incredible, and as a drummer, you pull inspiration from all different places. Most of my professional playing was in jazz. So, you know, if I'm just looking at the lineage of jazz players, you know, you have the showmans like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, Ed Shaughnessy. There's a lot to learn from those guys. Then you've got, you know, the great big band drummers like Louis Bellson. I really took a hard course of study in more small combo jazz. So from Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, who's still kicking ass at, you know, 90 something years old. And then into the new world, Greg Hutchinson, Brian Blade, all those guys. But then I also find a lot of inspiration from rock drummers. So even though I don't play a tremendous amount of rock, Liberty DeVito, who was the drummer for Billy Joel for many years, I've
Awesome.
always found his drumming to be so humble. Everything he plays is to make the song great. It's
Yeah, he
not
had to
about,
compliment Billy and his music.
yeah. So that's a terrible answer, and I apologize to everybody. But it's just a very difficult one to answer.
So you go there and you're hanging around Boston. You grew up in Connecticut. And when did you get into having your first cigar? I mean, you got into the cigar business, I understand, or at least you got into cigars sometime during your college days.
Yeah, early. I had two roommates in the dorms, and Josh and Chris. And Chris was from Pittsburgh. We used to go for a different walk through Boston, through the Back Bay every night. And one night we were walking down Newbury Street and passed a cigar bar. Now, you have to understand, I never smoked in my life. I was a lifelong asthmatic, and I had, you know, very little money as a college student. So we go walking down Newbury Street, and my roommate Chris says, "Oh, look, it's a cigar bar. Let's go in." And I'm like, you know, we don't know each other that well, but what makes you think at all that this aligns with my interests? I mean, you know, doesn't make any sense. But we ended up going in, and you know, I feel like I tell the story the same every time, but it's really very true. Walking through that door and just see, it was like a world that I had never seen before. And probably had I never walked through that door that day, I never would have seen it ever. But just leather chairs, jazz playing, people dressed up, you know, fancy glasses with brown stuff in it. It was like, you know, what is this? I've never seen this before. And so my roommate Chris went into the humidor, and he said, you know, it was explaining to me even what the room was and why it smelled the way it did, why it felt the way it did. And he picked out a cigar, an Ashton Classic Panatella. And we sat down. I got a coffee. It was the most expensive coffee I'd ever purchased in my life. He lit up his cigar and he said, "Why don't you just take a puff?" And I said, that's probably one step too far for me. This is already, over the line. And he explained that you don't inhale it, you just take a puff, you expel the smoke. And he did a really actually thoughtful job explaining how to do it. And so I took a puff, and I remember in that moment thinking, this is pretty cool. This is interesting. It's flavorful. It's not just, smoke. It really had flavor. Um, and then obviously I became enthralled with it. I got, as an artist, of course, you really kind of latch onto things and you want to go down that rabbit hole. And there wasn't a whole lot of information at the time. It was still relatively early in internet. So there were local stores that I would go to and try and learn. And I'd go to as many tastings as I could. It was the advent really of those early bulletin board days of really what is social media. But at the time, it was just bulletin boards where people could have discussions about different topics about cigars. And that was it. And then I got a job in the Prudential Center Mall. There was a little kiosk that sold cigars. I got a job there the spring semester of my first year. So I had just turned 19 when I started in retail.
So now, having had that experience, how long did it take you to go from puffing a cigar to retrohaling?
I don't think I retrohaled until I got to Davidoff. I want to say no one's ever asked me that question, so let me just go through my memory. I actually think the first real kind of deep dive into the understanding of retrohaling, I think, was in Honduras, 2003. I was on a trip to Camp Camacho when the Aroas still owned it, and I was with Christian, and he was adamant about retrohaling, and so that was probably the first time I learned about it and was exposed to it. I am not a every puff retrohale guy. I'm probably maybe 5 or 6 times during the course of a cigar. I find if I retrohale too much, it becomes difficult to track the development of nuanced change. So for me, it's really that's sort of my check after an inch, after 2 inches, to really kind of dive deeper under the covers to see what's different. That's my sort of barometer, for lack of a better word. So maybe 4, 5, 6 times during a cigar, I'll do it.
All right. That's actually some really interesting knowledge, because I tend to probably retrohale more than that. Over the years, it's become more and more. It's almost natural for me when I puff on a cigar. Sometimes I have a hard time not retrohaling. I'm the opposite side of that.
Yeah.
Now did you graduate Berkeley, or did you move into Davidoff somewhere in between them?
So I was originally going to graduate in 3 years. That was my plan. So I went full time 2 summer semesters. So I did fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, all full time. And then I totally burnt out. Really, really burnt out. So that summer I did some part-time, and that allowed me to actually go part-time for my last 2 years, which was great because it allowed me to gig a lot more and to work a lot more in the cigar shop. So I ended up doing 4 years, and it was basically part-time to finish up my requirements. And I ended up moving to New York May 1st, 2002, and my graduation was May 11th, 2002. And I actually went back to Boston just to graduate, walk, get my diploma, and then went back to New York. And then as soon as I got back to New York, I think I started I think I started that either that weekend or the weekend after at Davidoff.
So you had a stellar career at Davidoff, and you ended up going to Nat Sherman. And there's a lot of history in between there, on how all of that developed. And when you got into Nat Sherman, um, if I understand, the family kind of gave you range. You were kind of reinvigorating this brand to appeal more to a the younger heart. All right, not in packaging, and also to keep and maintain the older souls that were Nat Sherman originals.
Yeah, and that was really a bit of an evolution in the process of really identifying what the job was going to be. Initially, they approached me to run the store. I was running the two Davidoff stores at the end of my Davidoff career, and they approached me to run the Nat Sherman store, and it just wasn't the right fit for me, and so I respectfully declined. And they ended up following up pretty quickly and asked. I'll never forget the way the recruiter phrased the question to me. He said, "The Shermans have asked me to take another stab at the apple, and they'd like to know why you wouldn't work for their family." And it sticks with me because it was a really interesting moment that made me reconsider the job, because it had nothing to do with their family. It really had everything to do with that particular role and opportunity. And I just didn't think it was right. And so that's what I said to the recruiter, that, I've known the Shermans for years. They're wonderful people. And I don't want them to think at all that this has anything to do with them. It's just not the right, it's not the right opportunity for me at this time. I'm running two Davidoff stores. I have a track with this company. And whatever the story of my life will be, to me it doesn't make sense that the next chapter is leaving this track to go run a Nat Sherman store. I just don't get it. And he called me back and he said, the Shermans would like to have lunch. And I said, sure, that's great. And I met them for lunch, and we had this conversation face to face. And they said, so what would it take for you to work for us? And I said, to be honest, the issue is not your store. The store is a beautiful store. In fact, when it opened, I remember being, terribly nervous that this would affect the Davidoff New York business, because it was such a beautiful, beautiful emporium. But the reality is that at that particular moment in time, the Nat Sherman brand was much more familiar in the cigarette space by that time. And the cigar brand really did not have a large presence in brick and mortar stores at all. It was largely distributed through internet and catalog at significant discounts. And so what I said was, the only way we can really fix the store is if we actually fix the brand. And the only way to do that is to really reestablish it. So we have to discontinue the things that have been discounted. We need to get back to core, price correct the portfolio, and then price protect it in every outlet. And then we need to launch something new that is now. That is as much Nat Sherman as your Metropolitan brand is, but that looks different, feels different, tastes different, and speaks to the premium cigar smoker of 2011, not of the 90s. And if we can do that, then I'd be interested. And then I went through probably 2 weeks of interviews with anyone whose last name rhymed with Sherman. And it was just really spectacular. And by the time it was all done, they were incredibly generous and humble in recognizing that they just weren't happy with where things were at the moment, and that they were comfortable kind of allowing me to do what I thought was right. So I assured them, this is your company, not mine, but I will treat it like it's mine. Um, and we'll do it together, step by step, project by project. And that's exactly what we did.
Now, when you got into these projects, um, other than the Davidoff experience and having your experience as an individual smoking cigars, did you have any knowledge and thoughts or hands-on with blendings at all prior to that?
I actually did. I became very close early in my Davidoff career with the Quesada family.
Mhm.
They used to come to New York a lot and come to the Davidoff store. And I started traveling down to the Dominican in around 2004. And I would go on vacations, and I would spend most of my time with the Quesadas in the factory and just tasting and learning and tasting and learning. And Manolo Quesada was so gracious. I mean, he is gracious, but even then, just allowing me to learn, um, by trying, by experimenting, by putting things together, by simple things like, what if we take this wrapper and put it on this cigar? How will it change the flavor? And so those experiences really were transformative at a young age. I was 23 or 24 when I started doing that stuff. Um, and then as time went on, less real like writing recipes of blends, but more just kind of um, presenting feedback and ideas of what I was experiencing and what I think might improve it. They were the ones that would then take that feedback and turn it into actionable choices. But I would say around 2006, 2007, I started really pushing back, saying, well, can you help me understand the decisions you're making based on the feedback I give? Because that's the piece I really want to learn to connect those dots. And they did. And then I had the really good fortune, the young ones, so his daughters and his niece and nephews and cousins, they called me one day and said, we need you to come to Santiago on Saturday. And it was like a Tuesday. And I thought to myself, oh man, what happened? Is something wrong with Manolo? And they said, no, everything's fine. But don't tell Manolo, just book a flight, we'll pick you up. And I'm like, something is really going down. So I booked a flight. I got there on Saturday. They picked me up. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? We get to where the factory is today, but at that time it was just a warehouse for tobacco. And all the young ones are there. And they said, we want to make a cigar, and we want it to say Quesada. And we know our dad's not going to go for it, but it's the 35th anniversary, and we think that it deserves to say Quesada, and we want your help. And so we worked all day Saturday, all day Sunday, blending, going to the warehouses, pulling tobacco out of pilones that weren't even properly fermented. I'm pretty sure 2 of us threw up that day. I mean, it was just like absolute mayhem. And then Monday morning, we showed up in the factory, and Manolo walks by and sees me in the conference room and walks back and says, what the hell are you doing here? And I was like, we even made a PowerPoint presentation to like explain all this. Anyway, I got off on a tangent, but I did have some experience with blending and creative, probably the last 5 years of Davidoff. And then we also did some private labels just for the Davidoff store. And those were some projects that I helped with too. So a little bit of experience, but it was definitely a head first dive, starting in June of 11 when I joined Nat Sherman.
Very nice. That's a fun story. Everybody who's enjoying that story, I can tell you that right now. I'm just looking at all the hearts coming up. So a lot of people going to be on the Wheel of Wonderfulness next week. At this point, let me just take a quick short break to give a shout out to my sponsors for the show today. And then when we come back, what I want to do is I want to take us through your new venture, Ferio Tego, and how you've taken your experiences in life and applied it to this new venture and what's coming.
Great.
Let me just over here. So today's show is brought to you by Frontline Cigars. Frontline Cigars is a Chicagoland area cigar house that is always on the front line of flavor, innovation, and giving back to those who serve. Frontline is a first responder-owned company. Their Frontline Cigars strives to give back to those that serve, whether it be first responders or military, through numerous charitable foundations. At frontlinecigars.com, you will find a wide range of cigars from boutique to everyday brands, in addition to a fine selection of cigar accessories and swag. You can also find the Stogie Press 90 plus sampler pack in there. It's 5 cigars that I rated 90 plus that they carry. You can check that out if you go to frontlinecigars.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Eddie Tarazona and Tarazona Cigars. Eddie has been doing it with passion for years, and that's not just a phrase. That is how he operates his business and his life. Tarazona premium handmade long leaf cigars are each rolled to the highest quality by masterful rollers. Each hand that touches the process takes pride in the quality and craftsmanship of every cigar that goes into every box of Tarazona cigars. So next time you're looking for a fine smoke, do it with passion and reach for Tarazona. You can follow Tarazona Cigars on Facebook and Instagram and visit www.tarazonacigars.com. I thank my sponsors. Without them, this show is always a little harder to do.
Hey, Jimmie, I'll tell you, I started a watch party on my Facebook page too. And a buddy of mine, RJ, is watching, who's NYPD, one of the greatest of the great. But RJ drove me to the lunch with the Shermans for my very first interview. And going in, I told him what it was, and he said, you don't want to, that job's not for you. I don't know, the cigars, I don't know. And he waited for me. He waited for me while I had this lunch and interview. I came out of, and he said, so, and I explained what we had talked about. And he goes, dude, you're going to take this job, right? You definitely got to take this job. I'm like, you just told me not to take the job. But he's one of my dearest friends and a great guy, and he's watching on my feed, so I wanted to give a shout out.
Awesome. We got a good crowd watching, and always grows as the week goes on, for sure, as they go back and look at it. So you got this new adventure you're into now, and before we get there, I just want to ask you the simple question is, what was it like when you learned that Nat Sherman is no more? What went through your bones?
If there is good news, it was that I was part of the process from the beginning. So, I was fortunate to have a very senior position within the company. So I was part of the executive team. And so any of those very high level decisions that affected the company, the executive team was always brought in, very early to start scrutinizing what options and what decisions were available and then how to move forward. So I learned about it early, and I was grateful that the first decision was that Altria, which was the parent company that owned Nat Sherman in its entirety, obviously they bought us for our cigarette business, that the decision was to no longer keep the premium cigar business as part of Nat Sherman, but that they were willing to work hard to find a new home and to try and sell the company. That, that was it was a blow, but I was incredibly optimistic that we would be able to successfully sell this company. So I really was, I was enthusiastic. I was jazzed. I mean, I was pumped up, like, what a project. it was an amazing experience working on the acquisition and integration into Altria. I mean, that's really, once in a lifetime kind of work. To now work on selling a company,
Dismantling it, basically.
well, but first trying to sell it and move it was the first work that we were working on. I didn't think we were going to close. I thought for sure we were going to sell this business. So working on all the due diligence, putting together everything buyers would need, meeting with all the different buyers, and their lawyers and their executive teams to walk through scenarios of how our company might integrate with their companies, to really give them return on their investment. I mean, it was incredible work, and that started really October, November, December of 19, and then when we got into 2020, we were really cooking. I mean, we had narrowed it down to our preferred buyer. We still had a few qualified buyers just in case something happened with the preferred buyer. So we were ready to go. I mean, it was a done deal for all intents and purposes. And we met in March with the buyers, really kind of finalizing some details, joking at the time about this COVID thing, and that it was so overblown. And then 2 weeks later, it had spread across the nation, and everybody had to pump the brakes. All the buyers had to pump the brakes. And of course, it was discouraging, but I understood. I mean, if any prospective buyer certainly has to triage their own business as a priority, not acquire another one. So we worked for months to try and find a new buyer and a new solution. And just the longer the pandemic went on, it just became more and more challenging to get the work done. And our marching orders were one way or the other, we had to be done by the end of 2020. And so we knew by the middle of July, our last deal, and we turned over every rock. We worked tirelessly to try and find a home, and we couldn't get the deal done. And so it was the end of July. We just said, we just can't start over again. So that's when we made the decision to close. So that's a very long way of answering the question, but it wasn't a gut punch, because
you kind of knew where things were going. It was just kind of a letdown at the end that it was
disappointing.
Right.
It really, it felt in some ways that I failed. But when you look at what we were up against, it's hard to really to call it a failure. I've called it a COVID death, and that's really what it was.
One door closed, and you decided to open another door and create your own cigar company with your partner, who was the financial VP, I believe, at Nat Sherman. Let's talk about that. Introduce your company, introduce how this came to be, and talk a little bit about where this is going right now.
So Ferio Tego is the motto on our family crest, the Herklots coat of arms, which is impossible to see, but that's my family crest there. So on the shield,
killing.
That's right, Hercules striking the Hydra.
Right.
And so my plan B, knowing that we were winding down Nat Sherman and I would have to find a new job, my plan B was to launch my own company, launch my own brand. I had Ferio Tego registered for years, and I thought if there's ever an opportunity, this is the time to do it. And so, starting in, we announced August that we were closing. So August and September was all really overwhelming work to wind down the business. It was actually way more work than I thought it would be. I mean, growing the business was not easy over 9 years, but actually winding down the business was a tremendous amount of work. So I didn't have a lot of time really to work on my own stuff because it was just so much work winding down the company. And I wanted to do it right. We all did. We wanted to really focus on doing the task at hand. Altria was generous enough to provide soft landings for every single employee. They had kept all of us whole through the pandemic, even while the store was closed for months. And so we all felt very strongly that we are going to be totally focused on doing this right. And so as we were winding down, of course, there was that piece of me that just really struggled with the reality that all of our work is just going away. The 90-year legacy of our cigar business, the 9 years that I put in to kind of bring it back, and by no fault of our own, not by the merit of the product, which is excellent, the quality of the work we did, which was excellent, the commitment of our people, which was unwavering, we still had to close. That was a tough pill to swallow. And Brendan, my partner in Ferio Tego, and I, we worked very closely trying to sell the business, and now worked very closely winding it down. And in our sort of regular discussions, we kind of just had this what if. We knew that Altria wasn't interested in selling the brands. That's not what they do. They wanted to sell the whole company. They were not just going to piecemeal out the business, because part of the criteria for our transaction was to make sure that the buyers would be good stewards to carry on the legacy. They didn't want to see all our work land in the wrong hands. They were very clear about that. So we kind of just kept saying, I wonder if they would sell the brands to the right stewards. So we finally just sort of said, well, let's just ask. And so we reached out with basically a letter of consideration, and we kind of walked through our thoughts about what we wanted to do, what we were interested in, what we weren't interested in. Having been so close to the process for so long, we knew where the risks were in some of these transactions. For example, Nat Sherman is not gone. Nat Sherman is still a cigarette brand. And that's a brand that they own still to this day. It's still a company, it's still a brand. We knew that there was a lot of risk when you try and tie in Nat Sherman to anything but a cigarette. It presents a tremendous amount of risk. We understood that. So as part of our consideration, we specifically said, we recognize that Nat Sherman remains, and so we don't want it. We'll certainly honor it and embrace it, but these brands can live on without Nat Sherman, and that's what we would like to do. And Ferio Tego will be our vehicle to do that. And we walk them through what it means, the link to my family, the fact that Brendan and I were now going to do this together. And they came back with a resounding yes. And they were incredibly enthusiastic for us. They were rooting for us to get this deal done. And so we finally were able to get it done. So we formed Ferio Tego as a company. Ferio Tego will be also its own brand. It'll be the flagship brand of the company. And then all of the brands and the blends that were formerly under Nat Sherman will now be under Ferio Tego. So for example, the cigar you've got there, Jimmie, and this one here, they're both timeless. But as you can see on yours and on this one, there's that secondary band that says exclusively for Nat Sherman. So this is the Timeless Prestige Speciale. Nothing changes about this other than that band. And that band will now say exclusively for Ferio Tego.
Okay.
But that's it. So the Timeless Prestige, Supreme, Sterling, Panamericana, will all remain. Metropolitan Host, which is our #1 seller for 25 years, will stay. Metropolitan Connecticut and Maduro, Habano, everything stays. Our manufacturing partners stay. So Quesada family, Davidoff in Honduras, and the Plasencias in Nicaragua, they stay in place. So we basically bought the brands, we bought the intellectual property, we bought the right to re-commercialize exactly as they were commercialized before, just absent of Nat Sherman.
Now, so you've got that part of the portfolio, you have your own brand that's going to be your core, okay, introduction. Who are you using for that factory?
For Ferio Tego,
Yeah.
I really haven't discussed it publicly, but I'm happy to.
Yeah.
My relationship with our manufacturing partners is just, it's hard to put into words the gratitude I have for them. Starting in 2011, when it was time to get to work, the Sherman family had already been working with the Quesadas for many years, and I had a long-standing relationship with the Quesadas, and their commitment to our products and this journey was just steadfast from the first day. And they introduced me to the Plasencias, who I had met Nestor a couple of times, but Nestor from day one said, you know, in classic cigar vernacular, brother, whatever you need, you've got it. And so my first work on Ferio Tego is with both Quesada and Plasencia.
Two
But
different cars?
two different blends,
Okay.
two different factories.
Okay.
But I hope to, and this certainly does not take anything away from the sort of trio of partners we have today. But there are so many of my peers that are such incredible manufacturers, that I would love to start working with as well. And the exciting opportunity now as a small family business in the premium cigar world is that we can be agile now. We can take these kinds of small projects and try things out. You know, my cousin Hostos, by working, not by blood, but he really is like my brother or my cousin from Dominican. He's just opened his factory. It's one of the samples I was smoking earlier. You know, I'm so excited to be able to do something with him in the future. You know, and so many other folks. So, you know, right now, I want to honor our partners, and obviously, I need those partners to really get us all back up on our feet. The closure of Nat Sherman was not just devastating for us, and not just devastating for consumers. It was devastating for retailers who rely on the product to make money, and devastating for our manufacturing partners who rely on our products to make money. So first things first is we get our feet back under us. We restart production with Timeless and Metropolitan first, as well as Ferio Tego in Quesada and Plasencia. Davidoff has their work cut out for them to get Host back up and running, so I was not going to dilute their efforts. And then, you know, as we look towards the future, there's so many opportunities to play and to collaborate and to try new things. I'm really incredibly excited.
Ferio Tego line, two cigars. You don't have to get into all the details if you don't want to. I do understand that they're supposed to be hitting the market or being announced sometime in the spring.
That's the hope. So the factories are just reopening now,
Right.
after the holiday break. So they're you know, getting the factory floors ready and all of that. But the first order we place probably next week will be to ensure the Ferio Tego production begins. We were able to scrutinize blends and samples prior to the shutdown, holiday shutdown, not COVID shutdown. So I'm very, very excited. Two different blends. The plan is to offer them just in one vitola of each blend in limited production. So not limited edition necessarily. We're not going to limit it to a certain amount of cigars, but they're going to be made slowly, very thoughtfully. These are two very different expressions, but both of which I think will really bring to life what Ferio Tego means.
Are they bold, full-bodied, or they're going to be two different in that respect?
What I'll share is that what I love more than anything is body, more than strength, sometimes even more than complexity. For me, it's mouthfeel. The body and the weight of the smoke when you draw through it, I like it to be heavy and round and viscous, like the weight of a whiskey, like the weight of a great Burgundy, that kind of body. And it is sometimes easier to achieve that in fuller, richer, darker flavors and styles. It can be slightly more difficult to achieve that sometimes in the lighter, creamier styles. I intend to deliver on both of those styles.
What is your favorite leaves to work with for a wrapper?
Brown ones.
Brown leaves. I love it.
Brown. Yeah, I like brown. I don't like green. I don't like yellow. I like brown. Wrappers are funny. As many cigar geeks would probably agree, my affection for Cameroon runs very deep. But Cameroon, besides being expensive and hard to get, is also a tremendous liability on a product. When you ship Cameroon in winter, for example, Cameroon is so thin and it really does not retain a lot of oil. And so it's so brittle. I remember distinctly one time selling a guy a Don Carlos in the middle of winter at Davidoff, and he wanted to cut it and put it in his pocket and leave the store. And I said, let me just put it in a bag and wrap it for you. And he said, no, I'm good. And he put it in his pocket. And I thought to myself, that's not a good future for that cigar. He walked outside, turned around, came back in laughing. And I said, what happened? He said, I don't even have to look. I just heard it crack when I walked outside into the cold because it was so dry, it cracked like that. So I love Cameroon, but I've really not worked much with Cameroon. I love Corojo. I love Ecuador, Connecticut. Some people, believe that Connecticut really is the benchmark, and Ecuador is just kind of piggybacking on Connecticut. But I don't love true Connecticut shade. I think it's got a bit too much acidity and drying. And while it's beautiful, it doesn't contribute flavor. Ecuador, to my palate, does contribute some flavor. So I really love Connecticut from Ecuador. I love Criollo 98, which is like saying I love pasta. I mean, Criollo 98 is everywhere, but particularly Criollo 98 from Jalapa is just extraordinary tobacco. I like broadleaf. It can be really tricky to work with, but I do like it. Both Pennsylvania and Connecticut, which are very different. San Andreas, Mexico is really kind of gaining steam and popularity.
Everywhere.
I like it. I haven't worked much with it. I've made samples with it, and I've never loved the way it comes out. And I also feel like San Andreas can be a lot like Cameroon in its fragility.
Okay.
And so to counter that, you have to use high primings in order to be thick. And then when you use high primings, you have combustion issues.
Exactly.
So, I kind of stay in my wheelhouse. Lots of Corojo, lots of Criollo 98, Havana 2000, Connecticut, Ecuador.
I think you covered it. Very good. Couple of lightning round questions before I get into the next segment.
I'm ready.
I asked this to everybody, so you're gonna answer it. Skirts or pantsuits?
Skirts or pantsuits? And you ask that with absolutely no context, right? That's it?
No context.
I guess skirt.
Okay, it's good.
It really, it depends on the person, depends on the length, depends on the situation, but I suppose skirt.
Your favorite vacation spot?
Lately, it's been Ridgewood, New Jersey, because my favorite vacation spot. I love Dominican, so I like to work there. I like to vacation there. I really love the Gulf Coast of Florida. I've actually never vacationed there. That's actually not true. We did once with the family, but the Gulf Coast I think is just beautiful. Destin in particular,
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a hidden gem. At least for us East Coasters, that tends not to be the flight path. Everyone stays East Coast Florida. When you go west, a lot of people go to Gulf Coast, but the Gulf Coast of Florida, Destin in particular, is just so beautiful.
Powdered sugar sand.
It's it's just amazing.
It's like walking on cotton.
But off season, when you're there in season, it's crazy.
Yeah, of course. Dreams for your children?
Just happiness. Just happiness. I want them to have the confidence to do anything they want to do. I want them to wake up every day happy. Nothing brings me more joy than hearing my kids laugh and seeing them smile. And nothing breaks my heart more than seeing them sad. So, I want them to dream big. I want them to try things. There's going to be moments, of sadness in all of our lives. There is. But I just want them to be happy.
Okay. Last one, dog or cat?
Dog. Come on. Come
on. Okay. I agree with you on that for sure. At this point, I take a little short break. I'm going to go into what's new in news and cigar reviews on Stogie Press this past week. So we did give a quick recap. I'm going to start with recent cigar reviews. We did 2 reviews this week. I'm getting back into the cycle for 2020, 2021. We took a look at 2 cigars here. Both of them came in at 95. These are both spectacular cigars. The new Southern Draw Manzanita. We rated this one a 95. This cigar here is just a spectacular looking cigar. It's a Habano hybrid. These are all undisclosed regions. So Robert Holt and team, they're not saying where they come from, but it's a Habano hybrid with Habano binder and Pelo d'Or, Corojo, and Ligeros in the filler. I got some good cedar and chocolate, cinnamon, cream, and fruit, hazelnut. I mean, hazelnut was like everywhere on this cigar from the beginning, from the pre-light all the way through in the core. It's natural sweetness. This is a fabulous cigar. They come in these beautiful 10-count boxes. And from a burn perspective, just very nice. Just nice cone at the end when the ash fell. Coming through all the way down, good hour and 35-minute smoke. Absolutely beautiful cigar. Not much to take off except for a little mild wave that it had. The other one was it made a lot of lists this past 2020. I had reviewed one of the HVCs. I kept this one hanging around, but I finally picked it up the other day. So this will be on 2021's list for candidates for top cigars. This one here is the Hot Cake. This is the Ligueto #5. They have two of these, by the way. This means Little Lake. This is this little lake that is in Cuba, where the Cohiba factory and mansion is. So that's where that name comes from. This one here is a Mexican San Andreas with a Nicaraguan double binder of Corojo Jalapa and Corojo Esteli, and a Nicaraguan Corojo 2006 Viso Maduro as a filler. Very value priced. HVC has always had these value price cigars right in the wheelhouse of the consumers. This is only $9. Again, very flavorful. I got a nice bits of caramel in this, and earth and floral. It was very floral in the beginning, so you had that nice floral notes coming in, almost Cubanesque in style, which is what they always try to strive for. Again, the burn on this was quite nice. It had a little bit of an off burn cone to it when the ash fell, and had a little bit of an off burn here, but it didn't need to be touched up at all. So it took some points off here, but this is just had excellent, it scored a lot on my bonus point scale from flavors and how I enjoyed it. It was consistent. I smoked a number of these, and they were consistent across all the different samples. It was very complex and had this. I love when the cigar gets very oily above the burn line. I think it just adds flavor. You can comment on that if you want. And then the news for this week. So one of the big news things that came out this week is there is a new social media website, media platform called Stogie Lives. It was created by a woman, Valerie, up in the Chicago area. And she's only been smoking cigars, just kind of got into it, but she began to see all these people going into social media jail for posting things. And she decided she would create a social media platform that would operate a lot like the others that are out there, but it's all geared to cigar enthusiasts. So this is my page. I created one. You can create your own blog photos. You can have your own pages, your own groups. You can have a marketplace forum. It's probably the only place that I know of on social media where a cigar company or a manufacturer could actually advertise on a site. Okay, so that's something interesting. So that's something to check out. It's called StogieLives.com. And if you get a chance, anybody out there, you haven't seen this, you might want to check that out. The other news that came out, the FDA marked an historic milestone. They finalized 2 key rules for companies seeking to market new tobacco products. The good thing about this is cigars are not in this. So this is kind of continue to move that can down the road right now. So cigars are not affected by this, but this is good because they finalized it. So all of the other tobacco products now are under that rule and will be enforced. Hiram and Solomon Cigars continues with their European expansion. They moved into the UK market using a company called Brightleaf Distribution. So that's they're continuing their march into the European markets and other markets outside the United States. Tarazona Cigars has expanded their team with a new vice president of international sales and a Southwest regional manager. And some of you may know the fine young gentleman that's taken this over. So he's in charge. So Benny, who was with Don Kiki and working a lot with Karen Berger and helping to move that K by Karen out for a number of years, he now is in charge of international sales and development. And they also brought in Justin Sandlin, who's a 3rd-generation tobacco and cigar salesman, to handle all the Southwest area of Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Louisiana. So that's the news and reviews on Stogie Press. So going back to the comment I made, do you get that? Do you get that too? If a cigar has some nice oils on the wrapper that develop, not just the natural oils, but they start to develop as you're burning, and above that burn line, you begin to see that nice 1/8 inch shine above it. I feel I get a little more flavor from that.
It's very interesting learning to read the tea leaves when it comes to cigars. I'll tell you, when as you were going through some of those photos on the last one, and you mentioned that the ash cone was slightly off.
Left center, right?
That, from a manufacturer's standpoint, is a perfect cone. The cone occurs because the fillers are diverse, meaning that you have fillers coming from Ligero at the top of the plant, Viso, Seco, up and down. The cone means that the Ligeros were placed exactly in the center of that bunch, with then the corresponding tobaccos moving out as you go down the plant. As long as it is conical, it is perfect. You would have taken more points off if it was burning down one side and not the other, right?
Well, that's kind of what it was doing. So when I say it's centered, it means that if you were to look at that straight on, the cone, the tip of the cone is down, not
so
centered.
Did that correct? Because it looked like it did by the end.
Eventually, it found its way.
So what I think that is, if you picture a leaf and then a filler leaf, you remove about 2/3 of the center vein from the stalk side headed towards the tip. You're left with about 1/3 of the center vein from the tip down. And then you have the two sides that come out. When that leaf gets folded, the Ligero leaf, and placed in the middle, the next thing they do is they tear the end and they distribute it in the middle. Otherwise, every cigar would be a perfecto.
Right.
So they tear the tip and move it. I think that shift was probably a stem point of the Ligero that was just burning slower and sort of shifted that combustion over. But when I saw that cone, my first reaction was, damn, that is a very well-made cigar. I mean, that's really,
I can show you pictures. I bring that, I use that because I mean, I have cigars where that cone is absolutely perfect. It's like a rosebud, right? Perfect.
When you can get the cone to look like a freshly sharpened pencil, I mean, that's a dream come true.
There you go.
But it's amazing, those tea leaves. So the line around the combustion, if the line, for me, if the line presents shine, that's one thing. But if the line blisters, meaning it gets black, kind of charry, and the line burns down into the wrapper, that's actually a sign of too much humidity. Okay. And a lot of times you see that in cigars that weren't aged properly after they were manufactured. So just another tea leaf, when you see that line, to your point, I think it can be really indicative of oiliness and great construction, but it can also be like, let's say you're smoking a cigar and the flavor steams off and it has that burn line. You could then potentially draw conclusions that cigar did not rest for the proper amount of time, and that's why it's being thrown off. That burn line could confirm what your palate is telling you.
Now, when you do your cigars, when you're taking your time to do it right, how long would you be aging your cigars in the aging room before they leave the factory?
So, very easy answer. The first rule is you have to use aged tobacco. That's first. So we know it grows 3 months, it cures about 3 months, fermentation 2 years, a year, 2 years. Then the tobacco itself ages 2 or 3 years. When the cigar is then made, the only real reason to age, there's two. One is to allow some of those oils to kind of marry within the blend. But the most important reason for aging is because the cigars are made wet. You have to make cigars with a very high level of moisture in order to create the elasticity in every leaf, so that when you're actually creating the cigar itself, it doesn't crumble into a million pieces, right? So I use the analogy raking the leaves. If you rake on a dry fall day, you might as well just not bother, because all you're doing is crumbling the leaves, and you have this mosaic of dry leaves all over your lawn, and you've accomplished nothing, right? But when they're a little damp, or when they first fall, they still have moisture, and so they just fold up on each other and they make a great pile. Leaves are leaves. So when you add humidity and moisture in the manufacturing process, especially the wrapper, that's what allows you to stretch that wrapper on the board, so that you can roll the bunch into the wrapper, and then once it dries, it holds firm. And if you don't do that process, then you just have a ripply, loose cigar. So high humidity, high moisture, aging then balances out that moisture so that you can smoke it. Our rule is 12 weeks.
12 weeks. Okay.
And so that means that you have 3 months of cold aging, and cold aging also makes sure that you are preserving the integrity of flavor, and then you're avoiding any larvae or any of that kind of stuff. Then, of course, the cigars get frozen before they're imported to make sure there is no live larva that would turn into tobacco beetles later. And then they generally ship to a warehouse. Most warehouses are operating 4 to 6 months worth of inventory on hand. Then they ship to a retailer. And the retailers generally run about a month of inventory. So by and large, your average cigar, when you purchase it, is probably close to 8 months to a year old by the time you acquire it.
Yep. Now I have a question from Joey Kidd. Joey Kidd asks, Michael, can you explain the difference in thickness of the smoke from different cigars? I had one that had a thicker smoke and enjoyed it, but wasn't sure what type of cigar to look for with that type of smoke.
So who is that? Chris?
Joey Kidd.
Joey Kidd. So I think, Joey, you are talking about what I was talking about earlier with Ferio Tego, and that is body. So thickness of smoke, I assume you're talking about the body and the weight of the smoke. And you can, if I'm wrong, comment back in the comments, and Jimmie can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's what you mean. It's difficult to judge body just by looking at a cigar. It really helps to understand what's in it. And even when you read descriptions of countries of origin, it's difficult to really draw conclusions about body. And so I don't have a good answer other than just to tell you to try multiple cigars. There's just no way to know by looking at it what the body will be. There's just no way to do it. What I could tell you is, though generally wrapper will not give away all the clues, we all know that there are light wrap cigars that can be strong, and there are dark wrap cigars that can be mild. It is generally more common for darker wrapped cigars to trend fuller. If I look at our own Timeless line, for example, the Timeless Prestige is sort of a medium shade, great body. Timeless Supreme is a dark shade. I would actually argue milder than Prestige, but really rich, creamy body. But then the wild card, Sterling, which has a very light wrapper, has an equally full body as Supreme. But if you look at Metropolitan, which if you put a Metropolitan Connecticut wrapper next to a Sterling wrapper, they're almost the same. The Metropolitan Connecticut is a very light, silky kind of body, intentionally, but that's what it is. So there's just, I wish there was a better answer. There's just no way to judge it based on just looking at it. What I would say is that's where reviews like Jimmie's really can help you, is to look for those cues like body, and to not be confused by strength, not be confused by some of those other adjectives, but really look for body. And you want to look for full body, regardless of whether it's mild or strong or whatever.
Thank you. There you go. And he says that's exactly what he was asking about.
Cool.
Okay, so we're past the hour, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to give you a last word before I close it out.
Well, first, Jimmie, I want to thank you. I bailed on you last week as we got close to Saturday. That is not me. That's not what I do. And if it could have been avoided, it certainly would have been. And so I really appreciate your accommodation to move me to this week. Thanks everyone for the questions. I'm sorry, I posted a note on my own watch party because I wasn't paying attention to my comments over there and people were commenting. So thank you for everyone that's watching on my watch party. My conclusion, I guess, is I feel very fortunate to have made my passion my profession. I wanted to be a drummer, and I ended up the vice president of a cigar company, and now I just started my own. It's a very unconventional path. And some might say that I'm not doing what I intended to do. What I've learned, in fact, is that I'm doing exactly what I intended to do. I'm just doing it differently than I thought I would. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to make a passion a profession, which was drumming. I wanted to collaborate. I wanted to perform. And even though this is a completely different category and career line, I'm doing exactly what I always dreamed I'd do. And now I've jumped in 2 feet in doing it myself. I guess there's never really a right time or a wrong time to make really bold decisions. And in this case, I can't even tell you it's the right decision because I have no idea how this is going to work. But what I will say is I'm confident that it will work because I just believe that when you make right decisions, you surround yourself with good people, you do things honorable, you trust other people to help, good things happen. And just looking at the comments here, what I'm hearing is coming on your side, Jimmie. This industry is so special, despite the occasional divisiveness that you see. Our industry is not as divided as it may seem. There is no industry more together, rooting for each other than ours. And I'm so appreciative for all of the support and the enthusiasm and the encouragement. With that level of encouragement and enthusiasm and support, there's just no way that this is going to fail. And so I would just ask you, if you see Timeless or Metropolitan or Epica in a store today, buy it. I want you to buy absolutely everything you see, so that pipeline is wide open come spring or summer. And when we have our inventory back up and we're ready to start restoring these great brands back to market, hopefully there will be some spots on shelves where we can get some orders. But Jimmie, I really appreciate being on, and I appreciate what you do for our industry. Lots of people do shows and lots of people post photos, but you take it seriously, you do it professionally, you do it thoughtfully. And it's content like this and pages like this that make our industry better. So I'm so appreciative to be on the show, and I just can't thank you enough. And I hope you'll have me back on once Ferio Tego is in market and Timeless and Metropolitan is restored.
Absolutely. And I do truly appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know we have, I always got to adjust schedules. So I'll close it out. My friend Bernie over here wants to remind people that next week we hope to have Ricky Rodriguez on. He had to cancel also a while back. He had some family issues that popped up. So
Great guy.
Ricky should be on next week with CAO. And we're going to have some great time with that. Ricky's a great guy to have on the show. He's so enthusiastic. So I look forward to that. And until next week, Michael, thank you.
Ferio Tego.
Ferio Tego. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This one's a wrap.